Are we live? I guess so. I just want a crowd to stand around me. That's the thing I'd really like to have. 'Cause when I have a crowd to stand around me, then my life doesn't seem so bad. I am here and I am quite alone now. This guy stares at me with his face. Perhaps you think that I'm a weirdo. Well, fact is your thoughts aren't out of place. I'm the guy you're walking by. This is my life. I fly quite high. Oh, can't you see you could be me? It really doesn't take that much to try. I am strange, I really can't deny this. I like to jump around and that's no lie. You could help my life out just a little if you stop before you pass me by. You're probably wondering why I chose to do this. Fact is, I really do not know. Perhaps I had a troubled childhood. The only way to know is watch my show. I'm the guy that's in your eye. This is my life. I fly quite high. Oh, can't you see? You could be me. It really doesn't take that much to try. It really doesn't take that much to try. It really doesn't take that much to try. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to his own show, Matt Bowden.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to Whining On. Thank you, David Cassel, for that beautiful musical intro. David, please tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, let's see. A little bit about myself. Well, I live in a bus right now with my daughter, Grace. She's 8 years old. I bought this bus in 1995 when I was going to do my first major tour of Europe. I found it in England. It's a 1981 Leyland Cub handicap bus that used to do service in Hackney. And so it was in a lot. Yeah, it was in a lot that was owned by my girlfriend at the time, Abby Collins. Her father owned a car lot. And so we got to have a look at this thing. And I have to be honest, it wasn't the greatest. It wasn't the greatest decision to make because the vehicle, you know, it looked great, man. It was like, it reminded me of the Chariot from Lost in Space. I was like, it's got windows all around. And I was just like, I gotta live in that. And it was like, have you looked at the engine? I said, I don't care. You know, so I bought the thing and slapped the money down and leaked oil all the way from England over to Europe, you know, and then spent the next 12 years fixing this.
You've loved it and lived in it ever since.
Well, no, what happened was that
Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, just as much as I'd like to talk about the bus, we've got this kind of street performance, oral history thing over the show, and we'll get to the bus, I'm sure, later on, and part of your life. And if you had to give a CV kind of job description briefly of the things you've done of note, if you were trying to, you know, kind of have a quick CV of stuff, how would you do that? Just quickly over it, and we'll go through your history after, just so people got an idea if they haven't met you or heard of you before.
Bullet points. Okay. I started off doing a mime show in 1979, sold myself around to shopping centers and the like a lot of mimes did back then. I was one of 3 mimes in a 3,000 kilometer radius. So I had a corner on the market by and large. You know, the other 2 mime companies had different marketplaces, but one of my first gigs was working for the Bank of Montreal.
We're going to hit the story. Just
bullet points. Yeah, right. Really bad at this.
I wrote this and this. Yeah. No, it's fine.
All right.
You're doing great. You're too good.
Okay. So from 1981 through to 1988, I ran a company called the Interlude Company, which was a physical theater company, and an avant-garde sister company called the Nebulous Rebels that experimented with multimedia and film. I shot my first film in 1982 on 16 millimeter. I learned how to do that. I learned how to do television production through the Alberta Ministry of Culture in like 1983. And so I was on a track to being the artistic director of a theater company for the rest of my life. And then our government changed. So I went solo. I went to Toronto. I became a full-time solo street performer, and I created my show Hotch's 3D TV, which took me all over Canada for several years, and then to Australia, and then finally to Rotterdam, Holland, where in 1995 I won European Outdoor Performer of the Year, which launched me into.
So the answer to this question is, I worked in a theatre and I became a street performer.
Okay, good. Thank you for coaching me. Yeah. You're so good at this. You should be.
I just want to get your story in a continuous way, and I just wanted to get a brief framing, just so people know that you worked in the theatre, you've been a street performer, you've written a book about street performers.
That's right. That's I wrote it.
You've been involved in stuff.
I wrote this.
There you go. We'll have much more opportunity to have that up on the screen. I just wanted to give context to say you've worked in performance your entire life. Why? How did this start? Why go on this journey?
Well, let's see. I guess everybody comes from different backgrounds, and mine was quite chaotic. My family broke up when I was 5, and I lived with 4 foster families. I only saw my dad on weekends, and from 13 to 18, when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, doesn't matter so much. But at 13, I was left in this house by myself 5 days a week and watching Robin Williams on television and Shields and Yarnell. And I was like kind of taken by the whole mime thing. And I decided when I got the opportunity through high school to do a mime course for the summer, I did that. And I wrote a mime show, and it all sort of started with a French exchange program that I'd learned how to juggle that summer and do some very basic things. The biggest trick was catching a ball in the back of my neck. I'd written 3 mime sketches, 2 of which were not mine. I have to be honest. They were Robert Shields. And, he did one called The Biker, and I did that. And I remember going on this exchange program, and it was 1979, and I got stuck at the airport. There was a big airstrike, and the pilots weren't flying to Western Canada, and I was stuck in Toronto for it seemed like 7 or 8 days. So I had money in my wallet. The airline gave me $25 for losing my bags. The airport was full of people, and I was sitting there kind of going, okay, whatever. And then I fell asleep by a wall, and my wallet fell out of my pocket. And then I woke up to hearing footsteps running away and a door clicking. And I ran into where I thought that door was. And it was a stairwell that went down into the parking. And I was like, okay, my wallet's gone, and so there I was in the airport with no money. All I had was a Chivas Regal bag and 3 juggling balls. And so the next day I really started getting hungry. I went back to the airline counter and I said, oh man, they took my money. And they said, sorry, we can't give you any more. And I'm like, oh God. So with no access to cash, I pulled out these 3 juggling balls and I started rehearsing in a corner, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was practicing the tricks and facing away from people. And at one point I threw the ball up, I caught it on the back of my neck, and then I threw it up, but it kind of went around behind me. So I turned around to catch it, and I caught it in my hand. And there was just this sea of people, like probably, 500-600 people in one of these lounges. And they just all leapt into applause. So I guess they'd all been bored shitless watching me doing this thing in the corner. And then when I did this trick, and I just sort of went, oh, hi, I can do are you bored? And I kind of broke into, I said, I could do this mime routine. And they were like, yeah, anything, come on, entertain us. So I did these mime routines, and I asked, at the end, it strung me. I had this Chivas Regal bag, and I said, hey, if you could put in 25 cents or 50 cents, because back then 25 cents got you an hour of TV at the plug-in coin stations, and you could get a sandwich for 50 cents kind of thing. So, but I had people giving me 1s and 50 cents and 25 cents. And at the end of that first show, I think I had like $40, which was enough to get a room and a couchette for 4 hours where I could take a shower and lie down and watch TV. I was able to get a really nice meal in the cafeteria, and I had lots of coins to plug in the TV while I waited. And so I just started going to the different 4 corners of Pearson International Airport, playing in the corners and doing this thing. And I did it for 5 days, and I walked out with so much money in my pocket that I was kind of like, okay, this is cool. And when I got home,
had you seen street performance before then? Had you had some kind of knowledge of the fact that this could be a possibility?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I used to watch the Shields and Yarnell show. I think it was 1977. So
you got to admit, I was born in '84, so
okay,
please explain to me the Shields and Darnell show. I mean, I know Robin Williams.
Mark and Mindy from the late '70s and early '80s.
No.
Nanu. And I was part of that generation. Like I was 15, 16 years old when Mork and Mindy were on TV, when Shields and Yarnell were on TV. There was a huge mime upsurgence globally at that point in time, made famous primarily by Robert Shields, who with him and his wife, Lorraine Yarnell, would work in San Francisco. I can't remember the name of where they worked at the moment, but they became really fixtures in San Francisco for doing the Clinkers, which was their robotic mime act. And they did so well, they got picked up for a summer series on one of the major American networks. So they essentially got to do, I think it was like 12 shows or something. And I was glued, I was just like, oh, look, the Clinkers, and then when Robin Williams was on and he was wearing his tuxedo pants and suspenders, it's like, oh, well, I got to go get some tuxedo pants and suspenders. And so that was very much what Shields and Yarnell was this television show that was on once a week.
But were you aware of that kind of performance also existing in the streets and in the public places? Because if I would have just saw it on television, I might not have been able to make the link that I could do that in a public place.
Well,
I've only seen it in the confines of the box.
When I saw it on TV, I guess when I first did it in the airport, when I came home, I went, I need more of this. So I was living in Edmonton at the time, which is, cultural wasteland. It was before the Buskers Festival there. And I think I was probably Edmonton's first busker that, sometime, I think it was 1979, after I came back from the exchange program. I might be lost in my years, 78 or 79. Let me check the front page of the book. Hold on a second. It's written down. It's the first story. Oh, it's 1977, 1978. So yeah. So anyway, the idea was that I had to find a pedestrian area, and there wasn't one where I lived. There was Jasper Avenue, which was this big windswept street, with black buildings on it. And there was this one sort of square corner of a block that didn't have a building on it. It looked like it should, but it didn't. So what they'd done is they'd cleared it out and they'd put in some hilly bits and some grass and a walkway, and they called it Devonian Garden. So I went there. What I did is I called some friends, all my friends from drama camp and all my friends from high school. I called them up and I said, okay, I'm going to do a show down at 105th Street and Jasper Avenue, and I need an audience because I don't think there's going to be anybody around. So if you guys could come and support me in this first show on the streets in Edmonton, I'd be really appreciative. So all my friends from the Drumheller Drama School, which I attended earlier that summer and the summer before, came down to support me. And it was a windy day. It was borderline rainy. It was May. I think it was like May 1st even. And in Canada, it still snows until June. So, you got to watch out when the weather's changing. So I went there and I had my white face on and I was wearing a unitard with, like a blue unitard with, I look like a mime, not the stripy shirt. I was the unitard mime. And I had an easel with signs that were like, I can't show you on this screen, but like from there to there, and they came out of a portfolio case and they would go and they'd stick on the thing and it would say, the biker. And then I'd start doing the routine and there was no music back then. It was just me doing a mime routine to the whistling wind. And as the wind picked up, the sign would blow over. I would chase it across the square, pick it up and wipe my face and get white face paint, and smear. And it was by the end of the show, I was a mess. And it was like, thank you for coming. And people were coming up. And my friends were putting money in my hat going, good try, Dave. Good try. And I'm like, this is never going to work. Never going to work. But the good news is that 300 kilometers to the south, there was a city called Calgary. And Calgary was like a more Americanized city. It was, I don't know, while Edmonton was a blue collar city, the gateway to the oil north, Calgary was corporate head city for the oil companies. So the audiences, well, first of all, the city was one of the first in Canada to put in a pedestrian mall after Vancouver. So Granville Island, all the Canadian pitches started getting built around the early 80s, sort of around the same time that Covent Garden did. It's like some major corporation that owned all of these shopping centers decided this would be a great initiative, and so they opened up shopping streets where they took away the car traffic. And I went to Calgary when I was 18. I went out of my dad's house like a shot, and I got in my car and I drove down there with all my stuff. And I went, I'm going to make this work. So I got to the Stephen Avenue Mall and I showed up, and I was the only guy playing this brand new pedestrian mall. I'd play in front of the Hudson's Bay Company and I found my pitch, and And I would do like on a Thursday, I'd do a show around noon. On Friday, I'd do a show at noon. And then again at 6 when people were leaving. 7, it would start to thin out. And then on Saturdays, it was just mayhem. People all over the place. I do like 5 shows in a day, you know. And in 1980, I could probably pull $100 in a show. And my rent was $137 a month. So, and I was working every day of the week. So I was like jamming money into the cash, into the bank. Yeah. And
how was your personal development? So were you still at this point now when you've gone off and started working these other new towns? Are you still doing was it kind of a Marceau kind of thing with the easel and the boards and this kind of stuff?
No, I got rid of that stuff. And, my career has been evolutionary, that every time I went out, there was more changes to be made. And after that first experience with the white face and getting it all over myself and seeing what I looked like afterwards, and the fact that I was sweating and I still hadn't learned as a performer that, the best way to make the audience not sweat is for you to not sweat yourself. That's the easiest way to keep the audience cool is for you to stay cool. And when I got to Calgary, I had kind of become more contemporary. I had eyeliner on and I put a dot, so that you could see my eyes when I do my eye scales, and that would be the big thing, was like how you use the eyes. So that was important for me for the makeup. But by and large, I was wearing now just a bodysuit. I had Chinese slippers and I was doing, my mime act. But I would talk in between the numbers. Sometimes I would start improvising with people speaking, and it soon became, then when you're juggling something, you're not a mime anymore, and then you'd add a magic trick, and pretty soon I was wearing tux pants and a groovy shirt with suspenders, and every show I went out, I was kind of evolving. Oh, I remember that Robin Williams wore that thing. Maybe I should try that, get out there, and eventually you start finding your own ideas. Yeah. And what happened?
And how was that journey for you when you were just starting to find your ideas and doing the shows? Did you fall a lot?
Yeah.
Did the shows fail a lot?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of failure. And at the same time, there was a lot of blind luck. That I think I was just. I think I want to use the word stupid. To really realize that I could potentially embarrass myself. It just didn't seem like I could be embarrassed by myself out there. That if I made a mistake, I'd be like, oops, and it took a while before I met somebody who worked at the University of Calgary. He was a professor of developmental drama. So one of the things that happened was I started becoming a fixture in the city of Calgary, and the Calgary theater community was quite small. So I started, as I always did when I showed up anywhere, is I'd research where the theaters were and find out when the auditions were and see if I could get involved in the plays. And the University of Calgary had an acting program, and there were some professors there. So I went there and it was like, yeah, I want to go to this school. And they go, well, have you got the money? And I go, no, which wasn't true because I was doing pretty good on the streets, but I was going to have to work the streets to go to school, and they weren't going to let me. But it turns out that a couple of the professors, particularly a guy named Jerry Thurston, who was in developmental drama, took me aside and said, listen, I'm going to get you to come and teach some of my classes. Because I was teaching when I first arrived in Calgary. I was actually teaching my curriculum of mime, and I went to the school board and I went, I would like to teach mime classes. I'm 18 years old, and it's like, I'm going to go and teach a bunch of 17 and 16-year-olds my mime classes. So I got booked into the Calgary school system, the Catholic, like the separate school system. And from that, my references took me to the Edmonton system, the Red Deer system, and all the schools started booking me for workshops. Right. And this guy, he came from the University.
It seems a very, very fast. It seems like a very fast transition from 16 going out and doing your first show to 18 being a teacher of mime.
Yeah, that's kind of been a curse. Like, logistics has always been something that I'm good at, I suppose. That I don't know how to put this. I'm a deconstructionalist, so I can see things, take them apart, and put them back together again. And so when learning the mime, I was self-taught. In the beginning, and it was like figuring out how to do manipulation. You'd sit there and you go approach, grab, pick up the bar, release, relax, approach, grab, turn, release, relax, approach, turn, release, relax, approach, turn, and I called that, manipulation. And then there was fixed point, which were things that mimes did, but I didn't know what the names were. I just went, well, I will call that fixed point because my hand is fixed at a point in space. And then dynamic, the whole idea of learning how to lean on stuff. So I had these 3 categories for my 40-minute mime class. And then, it just sort of followed that. I went and studied corporal mime for a year, and then I took that into my curriculum. And there was learning. The learning has not stopped, So that was the thing, is that I was teaching at the University of Calgary when I was 18. I was teaching the BFA graduates my process, because the professors had decided they thought that it was kind of cool that a guy my age had come up with a process that was so in depth, and sort of unassisted. I guess I was a bit of a weirdo. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think that you've been able to? You said you're a deconstructionist, but it's not just that. From hearing you talk now, I know that you've been involved in theatre from at least 16, but I assume when you were younger, you were involved in theatre at school, right?
Well, when my family broke up and I lived with the foster families, my dad, who would go away for the week, needed to find ways to keep me disciplined. He wasn't there to do it. And the families that I was staying with did it in a very haphazard kind of fashion. It was very chaotic. It was all very chaotic. So my dad put me into figure skating. And so I think I was 7 years old when I started figure skating. I skated until I was 16. And so I guess what's that? 9 years. And I was being trained to be competitive. So I won 7 gold medals. I accelerated very quickly, learning these skills. It was kind of like circus on ice, and I learned how to throw myself up in the air. So there was a lot of stuff that came from my formative years where I understood about the momentum of the body and how it moves forward, and, the undulation of the spine. And, we learned that in ballet classes when I was 12, that there's the head and the hammer and the bust and the torso. So you learn and you find out that, later on it's the same foundations as mime. So when I got into mime and I started going to mime class, I was like, I've learned this already, and they go, no, you haven't. You got to do it this way now. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it again, So, figure skating. And then I got run over by a car when I was 16. Not exactly sure whether, I threw myself in front of that car because I was 16, right? I wanted to meet girls and I wanted to have a social life. And I was at the rink from like 5 a.m. until 8, and then it'd be school until 3, back at the rink at 4, skating till 7 or 8, eating at the rink. I mean, it was insane. And my dad was never there. I had this coach who was like a real Russian style coach. So that's what my dad did. He paid, his childcare was to put me in front of a professional figure skating coach. Yeah, and that kind of has dominated my life, that you, as a figure skater, you learn geometry, how to skate in a perfect circle. One of the things that we did was we'd spend an hour every day learning how to etch a perfect circle in the ground that was approximately 5 meters in diameter. And when you got tested, you had to skate the figure 8 3 times, and then you had to get as close to the initial ice tracing that you did the first time as you're skating around the circle. So you learn precision and control by trying to keep the blade right on top of the previous etching in the ice. And that taught me a lot about spatial awareness and how to fix images in 3 dimensions, and how to throw the body through space. So that's that. Yeah, that was figure skating. Then I got run over by the car.
So you had... Yes, so you got run over.
Yeah, got run over by a car. I was...
and when you got run over...
then I had to replace the skating with something else, because there was several months went by. I mean, I was in the hospital for some time. My wrist had to be reconstructed. And my ankle had also been injured earlier in that season, because they were rushing me to competition. They wanted me to have new boots. So we had custom made boots. The leather was too tough. My coach was cracking the whip, and I was skating around they're going, you're just going to skate laps until those leather boots are soft. And it'd be like, the guy designed them with plastic inserts, and they were never going to get soft.
they were like holding my ankle. As a matter of fact, if I fell, it was such a solid point that my ankle would break, kind of thing, instead of the boot giving way. And that's exactly what happened is that a tendon in my right ankle popped out of my ankle from the pressure. And I ended up being in hospital with a cast on my leg I was in hospital for about a week getting that fixed, and then 6 weeks recovery. And then I had to like really motor towards competition. And in that final competition that I did, I fell 3 times and I still won. And it was just so embarrassing to come off the ice, see my marks, and understand that I won because I was kind of like the favorite. I'd won all the previous competitions. Why should an injury affect me? And it was so depressing that people were kind of talking behind my back saying, oh, he shouldn't have won. He shouldn't have won. And I knew that I shouldn't have won, but they wanted to send me on to divisionals. And it was shortly after that I got hit by the car, and I was riding home. It was in a few blocks from my house. I came to it was a very quiet intersection. There was a Rambler automobile in the distance driving kind of like really slow towards the intersection. And I was on my bicycle kind of slowly coming to the intersection. I'm like, okay, I'm a bike. They see me. I'm going to keep going. Of course, yield right of way, we say in Canada, the people on the right have the right of way, but I just kept going. They kept going. And it was like, bam, bam. Right, left wrist gets all screwed up, and I'm in hospital for 10 days again. And that was the end. So when I came out, I was in school, months passed. And then somebody at the school said, so you used to figure skate? And I was like, yeah. And they said, have you tried thinking about the drama program? And I was like, no. And then so they introduced me to the drama teacher, and then they introduced me to the shop teacher, the guy who did all the wood making. They said, this guy's the set builder. And I was like, really? So I got into the drama program by building sets, learning how to build sets, and learning all this staging technique, and I use it to this day. I mean, Mr. Brown was a huge inspiration in my life. He really got me on track. I was sitting there working with, band saws and drills and all kinds of stuff. And I learned how to do it all by the time I was like 16 years old, in that first year. And then I got into some plays and started doing my mime show. And
so how did you go there? Before we move on from there, how did you go from working on the setting and working as a kind of a facilitator to the performance to then being front of house? It sounded like towards the end you did go and do some plays. You did get involved.
Yeah. Well,
there's a journey there.
Yeah, it was around the same time because I had a friend. His name was Michael. His name is Michael Charlois. He's still alive, and we're still friends, and I still talk to him. He and I met at the Drumheller Drama School when we were both 16 years old. And when we came back, we bonded through bongs kind of thing, and my dad was never home. So I was always over at his house bonging up in the basement, and we were reading Nietzsche and Chekhov and listening to Monty Python and writing plays. We always wrote these plays. We wrote a play called Trilogy for a Chair, and we started emulating Monty Python sketches, but coming up with our own style. And we wrote a show called The Edifice, and we went to the Victoria Composite High School Theater, which was his high school theater. I was at Scona Comp, but they had a fully functional theater, light rig, black box theater. So we went to the school and we said, can we like rent the theater? And they go, well, you can use it. We're like, okay, we want to put on one of our shows. So we printed posters, we got a stage manager, we rehearsed the thing up, and then we put it on. I think we got an audience of like 25 people each night for like 2 nights. And we were so happy. Yeah, it wasn't bad, and we didn't really spend any money to put it on. So we were like, okay, let's do this again. Okay. So, like 8 weeks later, we had another show up. And then, after that, we did another show. And Michael and I continued to produce over the next several years as things moved around. He eventually came to Calgary, where I was working with my theater company. He joined the Nebulous Rebels. And then we both went off to Toronto to do some theater training. And we got an apartment, and we were playwrights in our thing, writing new bits all the time. And yeah, so it was how did I move from the stagecraft to the theater? I guess it was grade 10. After I got into the set building later in that school year, a play was being cast called Flowers for Algernon, which is the story of a guy named Charlie. Actually, there's a movie called Charlie, and the script is about a guy who is mentally handicapped. He is taken into a hospital to give some experimental treatment, which turns him into a super genius. And
so it's like a lawnmower man kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of. And, he was like the stars of the show were always seniors. And then there were like the sophomores and the juniors, and I was a junior. So I got cast as young Charlie to show what he was like when he was, mentally incapacitated. He was mentally what's the politically correct term? He was mentally challenged, I guess is what we'd say. He suffered from a mental deficiency. And so I my first part was playing a mentally deficient person. And then from there, I was in other plays. I ended up being the lead in my senior year as I was a lead in 2 shows that year because we did 2 shows. One was called Anti-Mame, based on a musical, and I played Beauregard Jackson Pickett Burnside. I was like a Southern colonel and trying to woo this woman, and trying to do my best Southern, United States accent back when I was like 17 years old. And then later that year, we did The Crucible, where I got to play John Proctor, and I got, held on trial for witchcraft. So, and then I started getting parts in local plays like The Thwarting of Baron Ballagru was a kid's show happening at the Walter Dale Theater. I got cast as Obadiah Bobanob, the lead, I guess, that took the kids on the adventure. And because I had a mime show, I started getting booked at local theaters for Saturday afternoon kids theater shows, and they'd sell 75 tickets and give me 75% of it and keep 25 and stuff like that. So it just started snowballing. It's snowballing.
Yeah. And so what happened after the snowball, after you realized that the snowball? I suppose the better question is, did you realize it was snowballing?
Well, no, I know. It just seemed to all be happening as it should. And I went to an arts conference like when I was 18. I was fresh out of school. I went to Calgary. I was told by somebody that I should go to this thing in Red Deer, which was a city between Edmonton and Calgary, 150 kilometers. So both cities met there. We called it Piss City, because if you're driving to Calgary, you always stop in Red Deer to piss. And there was this thing called the Arts Marketplace, Red Deer Arts Marketplace, and there were workshops for acting and dancing and singing, and then a trade floor where you could put up a little display. And so I had my display for the interlude mime, which is what I called myself. And I sat there at my desk, and this is like my first encounter with Jerry Thurston from the University of Calgary. He walks in like this cowboy. He's got a black hat on. He's got black sunglasses on. And he walks up, and I have like a bowl on my desk saying, looking for donations, to help print my brochures. And the man walks up, and I got like, I don't know, $3 in there after being there all day. And I'm kind of like, oh man, this is just so boring. And he walks up and he goes, picks up a thing and goes, reads the sign and goes, reaches into his wallet, pulls out $20 and jams it in my thing and then walks away. And I'm like, who's that guy? And I found out he was the professor of developmental drama for the University of Calgary. And he became very much my mentor. And it was through him that I came to understand the accelerated learning process that I started using quite a bit. Well, it's central to my teaching now, actually, is that we did work very early on. I paid him, right? Like he said I didn't have to, but I felt that we needed to keep it this way. So I would give him what I could, and he would give me direction on the show.
Why did you feel like you needed to keep it that way? A lot of people might not have felt the same way as you.
Oh, well, yeah, it probably has a lot to do with my upbringing. I don't know if we wanted to go into my childhood, but I needed things to... Oh, yeah, I'm sure I can. I'm sure it'll make the show very interesting. I grew up with 4 different families and no family of my own. So I think I came out of that really kind of damaged. And you don't realize you're damaged when you come, when you're just what you are. And so when I left my dad's house, there was a lot. Like, I couldn't understand why he put me into figure skating. I got beat up all the time. I was called gay, and I was constantly ostracized by the students because I'd be late for school. I'd have to show up in my skating unitard, which was a lot like my mime unitard, in the early days. So I went from one unitard to another. And I got beat up a lot at school for being a figure skater. And some of the families I lived with weren't particularly friendly. I don't really think I need to go much beyond that, that there were reasons why I left. And I developed a real severe attitude towards authority, which I still possess to this day. That I remember one time I would always wait for my dad on a Friday night when I was like 10 years old. I'd be waiting for him, and he was always supposed to be there around 6 o'clock. He would go on these trips, drive 3,000 kilometers away, leave me with the family, leave me there on Sunday, come back on Friday, pick me up, and I get to spend Friday night and Saturday night with my dad, which I lived for that, right? And on this particular night, I'd been living with this family for about a year, and he called. I was waiting with my little bag packed, standing behind the curtains in the picture window, kind of, okay, where's my dad? And the phone rang, and I heard the conversation, and I knew that he wasn't coming. And so Mrs. Molson, that was her name, she came to me and she goes, David, your dad's not coming tonight. And it threw me into a tailspin. I couldn't be in this house anymore. And she told me that I had to put he would come for me in the morning, and I had to sleep in that bed again. I had to be in that house again. And she was telling me to do things. And I was like, no, I don't want to. I want to go. I want to be with my dad. And at one point I said to her, I don't want to live here anymore. And she just looked at me and went, well, when your father gets here, we'll make sure that becomes a reality, And my dad, when he found out and he had the conversation, he was like livid. He was really angry because I'd thrown him in the shit. He had to go to work on Monday. I wasn't allowed to come back there on Sunday. He was going to have to take time off work. And it just became this, it became a cluster boop, to sort me out. And so I went through a lot of situations. Like the next family was another thing where I lived in the basement for a while. So, there was no, when he put me in the house at 13, he said, you can't tell anybody, because he couldn't find me a place to live anymore. It was like by the time I was 13, I was unmanageable. And it was probably because there was no maternal figure there. There was no father giving me discipline, teaching me how to fight. I was getting beat up. Nobody was helping me. I didn't know what to do. I tried to fight back, but I didn't know how, and it's kind of pathetic really when you think think about it. And then
it's a story shared by a lot of people, people go through
I'm sure it is. And that's one of the things that I've lived with all my life is going, hey, I'm not alone in this. There's a lot of people with screwed up lives, and that's kind of become what's charted my course in many ways. Is once I came to understand what had happened to me, because at 13, I'm not allowed to have friends. I'm not allowed to tell anybody because my dad was worried that social services, if they found out, would have me taken away and he'd get in trouble. So it was very much a very secretive thing. I'd go to school. There was no discussion about anything. Nobody seemed to ask any questions. What was weird, one of the things that happened was that I got beat up severely when I was about 14. After living in the house for a year, I came home. Somebody decided to drag me from my front yard into my own backyard and just beat me. And the kid was bigger than me. And he was like, come on, figure skater, and calling me names and goading me, and that whole thing. And it was like I was in my backyard and there was really nothing I could do. And he just layered into me so badly that he pushed my nose all over my face. And this is like on a Tuesday, and my dad's just left the day before. So I've got he leaves me a bleeding mess on the ground, and I go inside.
And you can't tell anyone, I assume.
Well, this becomes the thing is that I start going to I go into the house and I see the damage. And then I go, this is not good. The guy's two no holes. That's all you see, So Gracie, you shouldn't really be listening to this at all. My daughter's listening to this at the moment. So anyway, I'll try and cut to the quick. I went to the neighbors. Nobody, no answer. I ended up going 4 doors down, almost into the next block. And when the woman opened the door, she was like, "Oh my God!" And she took me to the hospital. They saw to me. We had social medicine in Canada, so it didn't seem to matter. They reset my nose, asked me, where are your parents? And I went, "Oh, they're at work." Okay, well, we don't need to call them, kind of thing. And they, and a big nose cast on. And when my dad came home, I was like, "Oh, what happened to you?" And I went, "Oh, I got beat up." And he was like, "Well, maybe you'll learn one day to fight for yourself." And I'm like, I don't even know how to throw a punch, I'm like, I don't know. Come on, Dad, show me.
After this, your next kind of father figure, the person who was your mentor, you you have this transactional relationship with him because you feel, I assume, like that's needed.
Well, I suppose that's what it is. I go, listen, I need something from you, and I want to pay, and I'm going to pay you for it because I'm a professional and I pay my directors. So there was this, from the time I left home, I was like, I'm going to be a professional director producer. I'm going to use my mime show because I was, making money. I'm going to, and it was in a very short space of time that I was using money made from the street to hire actors, to rent studio spaces, to buy the advertising. I would take, $600 of my money and I would quadruple it by putting it into a theater, and so it was a matter of taking the money free from the street, putting it at actors, devising building an audience. And hold on one second. If you don't give me 1 second, I just gotta take a minute for a second. Gracie, is everything okay over here? I'm not talking about that anymore. Take your fingers out of your ears, baby. I won't be talking about that anymore, okay? Yeah, that's the that's my new challenge. Single dad in a bus. So
you started to get big in Canada then. You've got a big name. You're teaching university. You're a young man. I assume that maybe producers and people are starting to come to see you. You start getting more options unfolding in front of you. Would I be correct in thinking that?
Yeah, and it was a very special time because, like I said, I was the only mime. I was the only guy doing physical theater. I mean, there was the Arete Mime Company, but they were big leagues doing national tours. They were from my city, and I looked up to them. They were gods to me, but they didn't really play much around town. They did like one show a year, and then there was David Shantler, who did the Trickster mime show, and he was doing a different form of mime again. So my show was really kind of a conventional mimey show with mimey bits in the beginning. And I got asked to do, I got booked at a couple of restaurants to work their crowd lines on Sundays. That my Marvin's Deli Cafe would bring me in from like 10 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd get paid, and then they'd also give me like a dinner or a lunch that I could have with a friend, stuff like that. And hold on a second. Gracie, come here, baby. Oh, she's all right. So yeah, so it was very much a matter that I started getting picked up. Like there was a kids television show, and I became a guest artist on it several times. I started touring outside of the cities and doing British Columbia and a little bit of Saskatchewan and touring in the school system. Was I a celebrity? Well, people knew me because I was in the paper every time there was a show and there was a review, and and I was developing an audience in Calgary, and that all continued on until about 1986 when the theater we were in.
And how did that affect the younger man that came from possibly I'm guessing needed some attention and needed some love and was limited of that through his younger life? How did this have an effect on you then, becoming a verging celebrated person at this point?
I don't know. I guess it fills you with a certain degree of confidence because it's you're being allowed to do the things that you dreamed of doing. So there was I had a good opportunity to do the things I wanted to do. And, I started a theater company in Calgary and was taking the money that I was making and putting it into the theater company. And the state came to me at one point and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm producing shows." And they said, and you're putting your own money in? And I went, yeah. And I wasn't saving anything, right? It was like, I'd make the money, I'd spend it on stuff. There never seemed to be any materialism in what I was doing. I wasn't interested in owning a house. I wasn't interested in the luxury life. I wanted to be around people. And so I figured that maybe if I, was able to hire actors and be around, that a community would develop. And that's largely what started happening. I ran a room in Calgary. I put on band nights. Other people came along, started joining my theater company. And pretty soon. Do you
want to go through the process of opening it up, looking at the venue, deciding what you're doing, figuring that stuff?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, there was another group in town called the One Yellow Rabbit. And I was interested in finding a studio to live and work in. And I talked with Michael Green, who was the artistic director of One Yellow Rabbit. They were about 10 years older than me, and they ran an alternative theater company. And he and I had been in a play together called First Aid for the Choking Victims. So we'd gotten to know each other when I first came to Calgary and got cast in a play that he was in, being directed by Gary Stromsmo at Western Canadian High School. And so he and I became fast friends. And I said, I found a place over on Electric Avenue where all the bars are. We could open a little theater there. The landlords allowed us to move into the basement, not the main floor. And then Michael was like, okay, well, that'll be a good incubator. And so then I had to go on tour. I suggested, and then the landlord told us just before we had to go on tour that we had to leave the building. This is like 6 months later. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And Michael said, don't worry about it. I'll find another building. And so he did that. He went, and while I was on tour, he found a building. And when we came back, we essentially just moved our stuff into the building. We shared this building with him. It was an old glass shop, auto glass shop. And we had a very low ceiling. It was like maybe 3.5 meters. And so we painted the whole thing black, turned it into a black box theater, and worked out of that space from 1983 until 1986, I guess.
Okay. And so you said a culture built up there, like a community.
Yeah, it was like it was a small town, and there was a single alternative arts venue, and then there was the Performing Arts Center, and there was the Pump House Theater, and maybe one other smaller theater in town. But those are the venues, and at one point, One Yellow Rabbit started getting really large. Like they started getting federal operating grants, and they were being asked. They were developing a new arts center in town. The Theatre Calgary and the Alberta Theatre Projects were building a new building with provincial and federal money. And they asked the One Yellow Rabbit if they wanted to come in and take over the secret theater. So they actually ended up getting a space in the official Performing Arts Center, and they moved out of the building, and we were left with the building for ourselves, which we kept until about 1986 when it couldn't be sustained anymore because the government was changing, funding was getting changed around. So I moved to Edmonton. I moved my whole theater operation up to Edmonton to get closer to the seat of government, to try and understand what was happening to the change of our politics. And because we were doing shows, like for 7 years, I did shows touring through the schools with an ensemble of 4. I had a staff of 15 people. There were 6 actors and 8 administrative staff, including set technicians, sound operator. And we would tour 5 days a week, 2 shows a day to every school. So, 10 shows a week. And then coming home on Friday night, there'd be like a band night, Friday night, Saturday night, there'd be poetry Sunday, and then we'd be back in the truck on Monday morning, so it was a pretty full on time. And there was a sense of community. There was a lot of drama. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of stress, It was great.
And so when it gets to 1986, you moved to Edmonton to try and figure out more of the function of the government, and you tried to get the company there. And I assume that doesn't work then, because as far as I'm aware, you go to Australia shortly after this. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, that's what happened was, and I suppose this is, in the end, this is a real the consideration of how I came to be, that I ended up being directed by people at my high school after leaving figure skating. And I think somehow, based on my scholastic performance, it was possible that I was a kid in danger, that based on where I was and everything, I could have very easily turned to drugs, for example, if theater hadn't sort of found its way into my heart, that my life was empty and I was looking for something. And it was because of the incredible social programming that my province had engaged in, because it was an oil-rich province being run by a social government. So they were a lot like Norway. They felt they had to put a lot of money aside to prepare for the day when the oil wasn't going to be around. They invested heavily in the arts. We had a thing called the Heritage Trust Fund, which had $75 million in it, earning interest, which back in the 80s was like 18%. It was like turning over. And they were using this money to train new young actors, to set up new theaters. There was I think something like 40 touring houses set up around the province. They needed shows for those things. So my generation, there was probably a few hundred of us trained through a summer drama program to be introduced to what the arts were, to pick our disciplines and to start going in those directions. So I was a product of that kind of a social initiative put in place by a government. And then that government changed in 1986 and became a conservative government, and the Alberta Foundation or the Alberta Ministry for the Arts was disbanded. You know, it was a conservative government, so the arts had a low priority. Funding started getting pulled. Subsidies that we used to receive were no longer being received. I had sort of played my cards as a soloist in the 7 years that I've been there and needed to search further abroad. And so I couldn't bring the money in. I was now relying on the revenues run by the theater company. And so in 1988, after running a season called Theater for the Brave, where we did Marat Sade, Reasonable Facsimile, we did To Be a Servant or a Master. It was a Commedia dell'arte show, and another show that dealt with fear of death called Conditioned Response. So these are all really experimental shows. And in a city like Edmonton, which is like a musical theater place, my theater was the odd place out. You know, we had our own building. We did movie nights on Sundays. We did poetry readings on Sunday afternoons, avant-garde plays, bands. I was always I loved putting on bands. I loved being around music. So 1988, I shut that whole thing down and went east. And got out of ensemble work. I went completely solo. I got to Toronto. I started playing at Harvard.
And why did you make that decision?
Well,
why did you make that decision? I drove you to that.
Well, it was being, you know, as when you work in a theater, you're incredibly aware of the politics that drive cultural funding. From an early age, you know, I was trained by my mentors and my professors. I'll call them that, even though I didn't get any degrees. I was party to all of their curriculums and the reading materials, and they always handed stuff over to me. And I was ravenous. I'd be like, you know, what do you got? You know, and I'd be reading, and I'd read and read and read, and having these opportunities to teach in the university and to talk with people in other departments about issues. So when I did the Cosmic Garbage Bin in 1984, I created this show. This was my breakaway moment. 1984, I had a mime show and a clown show, but I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to have a multimedia show that involved puppets and a spaceship and have a story. I didn't want it to be sketches. I wanted it to be a full-length story. And so what I did is I worked with a whole bunch of people, including some of the One Yellow Rabbits. I assembled a writing team. I was working with my partner, Christine Ells, at the time. And we wrote a story about a custodian named Gus Croker, who was my clown from the previous show, The Imaginarium. So it was his sequel. I had this show called The Imaginarium where this custodian shows up in a theater when it's closed, and he finds a trunk and he pulls stuff out and creates a fantasy world with 16 characters. And so that was a very successful show, toured around for years. And somebody said, what's your new show? And I went, okay. And so Cosmic Garbage Bin was born. I found a large dustbin. It was like massive, and it was round. I have to do it small because we have half a window. And it was like about, when you stood up to it, it came to about here, and it had this dome top. So if you turned it on its side and you put a fin on it and a couple of fins and some wheels, it would roll around looking like a spaceship. And you can see it on my YouTube channel. I designed it so that you could get it. And I learned things like a little bit of engineering to do this. And it was really kind of hit and miss in the beginning. I built a prototype, and I wanted this spaceship. I wanted you to be able to go to the top and then kind of put your leg out the side and then have it tip over, and then you'd pedal it to drive it around the stage. And then when you want it to land, you'd have to like go forwards and then quickly backwards, and the thing would tip up, and then the hatch would open and the alien would come out. So the show focused on Gus Croker in his theater cleaning up a mess, and then a garbage monster shows up when he's gone, and it spits garbage all over the place. And then a spaceship crashes through the roof. This alien gets out, and Gus is mortified, and his first impulse is to kill the alien. So he chases the alien around the theater, and the alien chases him. Actually, the alien chases him around the theater, gets him cornered, and the alien's offering like this yellow balloon, and it's his life support system. It's like, here, I'm vulnerable. Gus disables the life support system. The alien falls to the ground, and the kids are yelling, "What are you doing? He's trying to help you. He's trying to help you." And you're like, what? what do you mean he's trying to help me? He goes, he wants to be your friend. And like at the beginning of the show, when the garbage monster comes out, he comes out with a yellow balloon and lets it go, and it goes, in amongst the garbage. And I find that balloon earlier in the show, and I put it in my pocket. And the kids remember this. It's 25 minutes into the show. And I'm like, well, what do I do? What do I do? And they go, there's a balloon in your pocket. You go, there is? And they go, yeah. I go, this one? They go, no, the other one, you idiot. No, okay. So you reach in the other pocket and you pull out the balloon. I go, what do I do now? And they go, blow it up. You know, okay. Blow up the balloon. It's like, what do I do now? They go, attach it to a tail thing, the hosey part. And I was like, okay. And so I do that. And then the alien comes back to life. And it's like, there's this moment where this foreign creature and me have to kind of get over each other. And so in the study guide, the students had been primed for 3 weeks about cultural tolerance and what it is to be a multicultural nation, how to deal with people who are not from your cultural milieu. How do we create an integrated society of diverse personalities and beliefs? And we got money from the government to put together a study guide and, writers to help us put together the story in such a way that the kids would find these markers that they could respond to and then use the exercises from the guide to help my character get through it. And I remember one of the statements I made in the show was, you said, you're being a meanie. And I went, what do you mean I'm being a meanie? We're supposed to destroy things we don't understand, aren't we? And the kids would go, no. And I go, but that's what the adults do, and it became a kind of a show that had this double-edged sword. All of a sudden, as the show got out of its first year, all of these new jokes were coming up that when we started going into theaters, the adults enjoyed the show just as much as the kids for kind of like the double layers we had in it. So anyway, Gorfo gets Gus and he's showing him a wanted poster for the garbage monster. They go into space hunting for a garbage monster who's destroying the universe. They fly to the planet Biplodix, and where the monster eats some aliens, and they eat them whole. Like the monster had a mouth, and it would eat you whole. And then at the end of, by the end of the top of the climax sequence is where I get eaten. So the monster would eat me, and then we'd have this whole fight scene where I was inside the monster trying to move backwards and forwards, where Gorfo was having a silly string gun fight with him. And so the reason I'm telling you this story is that show became the flagship, and I started every year getting a new brief. We'd go to the teachers' conferences with other theater companies, and we'd sit with teachers, and we'd talk about what are the issues that you believe that the theater and the performance in schools programs need to meet. And they'd say things like peer pressure, how to deal with, there were all kinds of things. There was another group called the Catalyst Theater, which dealt with a lot of things that were for older kids. Our stuff was mostly for elementary, junior high school, and we did the wind walk.
So you're not dealing with the post-pubertic issues.
No, we were dealing with young kids, between the grades 1 through to grade 7, 8, I guess was like kind of our limit. And the Cosmic Garbage had been played to year 7, and when I did that, I had to rock and roll it a bit more, but there was a spaceship in the show. There were groovy puppets that were made by Ronnie Burkett, who is a famous Canadian puppeteer, award-winning, like a national treasure.
And so you were doing these yearly kind of focus groups on what you should be doing.
Yeah, we'd go to the school. What we would do is that the teachers' conferences would allow for about 16 showcase performances of 15 minutes each over the course of 3 or 4 days. So there'd be one in the morning, one at lunch, a couple in the evening, and they would come and they would rate us. We'd be able to get a maximum, like a total of 40 points on grading for educational content, relevance, professionality and stuff like this. And we consistently got 39 and 40, as our score, and we were booked every year, and it was really because I had been given guidance by my government and my peers, the theatrical community on how to manifest these things correctly, and not everybody agreed. Sometimes there was friction on how it was going to be done, but in the end, we got the shows out there. There was about 4 shows, I guess, I took through the school networks, Yeah.
And so why did you come to the end of thinking about not doing this anymore then? What happened? Why close it up?
Well, I think it comes down to the objectives of any given government, that good governance gives the population the education it needs to solve its social problems to a degree. You know, I mean, make information and education available to people so they can improve upon their lives. And I grew up in a period in history when that was really the case. You know, that we weren't on the neoliberal free market trail. It was America had transitioned. Canada was still behind it. And we were just about to sign our free trade agreement with America, which was the nail in our coffin. When they signed the free trade agreement in 1986, we watched everything start to disintegrate. That culture was on the chopping block. And I guess what it was, this is what it came down to for me. And I think a lot of us back then were talking about this, you know, when we were meeting as creative community, kind of going, okay, what's happening to our country and what's happening to our cultural identity? As Canadians, we travel to other cities and our cities are 1,200 kilometers apart. We need government money to pay for trucks and fuel. You know, we need subsidies to help build the shows that deal with the social issues that these communities are dealing with, you know. And when the government changed to a conservative government, then the ministry was closed down. And this is the telling tale. This is why I got out of it. They closed the Ministry of Culture, which was a state-run department given money every year from the Heritage Trust Fund. So there was nothing coming out of anything except interest earned. This is the important thing to remember, right? Interest earned. It wasn't costing the province anything. But the Conservative government will take money from wherever it can. And excuse me. And hold on one second while I just deal with some lighting issues here.
No worries.
Okay. Excuse me.
That's particularly interested in this subject matter, being a coal miner's son. And living in Thatcherite Britain, I saw this as well. I saw the change during the time you're talking about. I was a very young man. You know, I was born in 1984, so it really was hitting at its worst. I was 4 or 5 years old.
Reagan and Thatcher started it off. Sorry, Reagan and Thatcher were the ones who you know got this ball rolling. The whole Milton Friedman Chicago School of Economics. You know, by the time I was 24 years old, I understood who Joseph Maynard Keynes was. I understood, you know, who Friedrich von Hayek was. These were things made available to me by my mentors going, you have to understand a change is coming. It is pursuing these objectives in this new world order. We will see a shift from arts and culture to entertainment. And the question was, well, what's the difference? And they go, oh, well, you know, and it came down basically to this, that the arts and culture was an engagement of social issues, whereas entertainment was a diversion from a discussion of those issues. And I think that that's the sort of the deciding factor for me. And it's sort of summed up in this short story. After the ministry closed down, the Alberta Foundation for the Performing Arts was founded. And it sounds like a regal name. You go, oh, it's the government, but it's you know, it's got a new name. And what it was an arm's length organization from the government that got its money specifically from gambling revenues, which the new government was now legalizing. So the issuing of casino licenses was going to be increased under this new government. So we went to the teachers' conference that year, and we sat down with the teachers, and the teachers are like, you know, what we were saying, well, what do you think we need to focus on this year? And the teacher said, oh, well, we need to start addressing the problems with addictive behaviors. And I'm like, right. And, you know, a lot of them started expressing concern that we were going to be shifting to a gambling oriented society, that they didn't know what this was going to do to families, particularly low income families who, you know, addiction being what it is, that, you know, dads might end up going to the casino and losing the week's grocery money. These were real fears before the thing kicked in. And so they said, we'd like you to do a show that somehow addresses, you know, the urgency of addiction awareness and repetitive behavioral cycles. And we're like, okay, so now we have to go to the Alberta Foundation for the Performing Arts to ask for this money. So I went in, I sat down and had my meeting, and they said, so what do you want? I said, well, we need to apply for this year's educational touring funds. We were told that this is where we come for it. And they said, well, make your application. And they said, can you tell us briefly what it's about? And I told them, and they looked at me directly and they said, we're not going to finance a show like that. that in order for this organization to get money, we have to hope that people use those casino licenses and develop the behaviors necessary to make sure the casinos continue to operate. And so, I mean, I'm a young man. I sit there and go, so you're saying that we have to endorse addictive behaviors in order to have a cultural framework that addresses social issues like addictive behaviors? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. You want to go poof. You want to disappear, and you do one anyway. So it just became obvious that the landscape was shrinking, and that this was the culling of.
Did you leave the meeting politely? Did you politely leave, or did you say, "Well, fuck you," and leave this meeting with these people?
No, you don't do that when you're the artistic director of a theater company. You go in and you have your meetings, but you leave with a certain feeling of abandonment and this idea that they don't care, and I'm not gonna lie to you. When I was a younger man, I was passionate about what I did, and there were probably times when I lost my temper in the wrong place. I'm not gonna say I didn't. I wasn't an angel, that sometimes you end up between a rock and a hard place, particularly when you got a bunch of people who are expecting paychecks, and you got to figure out what to do when the money's not there, and I believe that I did everything, working with my board of directors to always make sure that we could make ends meet. But when the end came, it was like, we were running a $15,000 deficit by that point. And when the government finally changed, a representative came to my theater and he goes, okay, so the government's changing. We've got one more grant round. How much are you in debt? And we said 15,000. Like, okay, make an application for 15,000. We'll send you the money. So when that opportunity opened up to eradicate the debt and have everything at zero after years of chasing and falling short, in those last 3 years, we were always like, oh God. And it was like, I kind of went, okay, it's been reset to zero. I think this is probably a good time to go. That keeping the building, the other thing that happened is that under the new government, there was no school touring funding, and permission had been given to places like Grant McEwen Community College, which offered a theater arts course, to get the students to put together a show and tour that to the school. So it was coming directly out of college to the schools, which meant that anybody coming out of college looking for a job from me, well, they took the jobs I had to offer as part of their training. And I couldn't anymore. It was just, it had almost killed me. And I needed to go in a different direction at that point.
Was there some soul searching? Did you sit and really struggle over it, or was there an epiphany, or?
I didn't want to give up. So the producer in me put everything into storage, the spaceship, the puppets, all of the production assets went into storage. I moved to Toronto, and before I did a showcase of a show called Sybil the Civil Dragon. It was a show dealing with abuse. It was dealing with different kinds of abuse, and the professionals of the day had kind of led us in this direction that what are the problems that lead to abuse in our country? And there's lots of reasons, but one scholar said, well, it might be the dualistic means by which this country operates itself. I mean, if you consider that this is built on Aboriginal land, that the land was stolen, that the people were subjected to a genocide, that there has been no compensation for that, really, that how can you teach children not to steal and do harm if the country in which they live is based on theft and causing harm? So that became a big thing. And in the teacher's guide, there was the Grace Contrino Abrams Peace Foundation out of San Francisco was one of the organizations that we ended up getting a lot of our advice from, based on recommendations from the University of Alberta. They were the people I went to. I went, who do I talk to about this? What do we talk to about when we're going to try and figure out, peer pressure and abuse and things like that. So in the show, there was a speech made, quite an inflammatory speech. Actually, it was for kids, but the speech went, the story briefly is that there's a dragon that lives in a glade on the edge of a desert forest. So she's got a cave, and we built this full set. Like, you'd go into the gymnasium and it had been transformed into a park. We had AstroTurf on the ground. There was a big black enclosure that was 3 meters high. There was a set of hills. There was a big portable palace that sat about, I don't know, that was quite about 8-9 feet high, I guess. That was on a trailer that was pulled in by a golf cart. And I got this whole thing, I produced the shit out of this thing. There was a cave and original music by Richard Link. And it was all about Sybil living in this glade for 1,000 years. It's her birthday. So she goes off to the desert forest to find her favorite dessert. And while she's gone, Horace and Trixie show up in their kingdom mobile in their Porto Palace. And they decide that they're going to homestead in the area. And so Trixie's looking around, the princess, and she looks and she sees the cave and goes, oh, that's an eyesore. Let's park the cave over there. Or let's park the castle over there in front of the cave. So the castle's parked in front of the cave, and they're setting things up, got lawn chairs out and stuff. And then while they're lying down, having a rest, Sybil, the dragon, comes back, and she's this big foam puppet that I built from scratch after learning how to do foam sculpture. And she had moving eyes and puff, smoke out of her nostrils and stuff, and blew fire at the end of the show. She comes back and it's like, excuse me, your house is in front of my doorway. Could you please let me into my doorway, please? And then there's a confrontation between Trixie and Horace, where Trixie says to Horace, because he's the knight, he's got to go out and deal with the dragon. So he goes out to deal with the dragon, and he becomes friends with the dragon, which is not what Trixie wants. And so by the end of the show, Trixie takes matters into her own hands, does battle with the dragon until such a time. And Trixie's, of that mindset. This is where she wants to be. This is what she's going to have, and she's going to have it. And she starts the thing off. There's when they arrive there, there's a flag raising ceremony. And she puts the flag in the ground, raises the flag, and she goes, and to the best of my knowledge, there are no indigenous peoples in the vicinity whose land we will have to expropriate and then later pay compensation to when they declare ridiculously large sums of money for previously unnegotiated mineral rights. We'll have our own laws, set up our own taxes, and be totally autonomous until the neighboring kingdom invades us, at which point the world governing body will intercede and make peace for all concerned. So anyway, that was in the show, and the kids always went crazy, with the stuff from the study guide. What do you do when somebody starts to poke you with a lance, kind of thing. And in the end, everybody makes up and decides to live in the area together, But the kids are instrumental in giving Sybil the dragon advice on how to deal with Trixie and how to deal with Horace. They talk to Horace, and eventually they talk to Trixie, who seems to be the most immovable object.
Like a process of conflict resolution that you kind of go through with the kids.
Yeah, it was.
So at this point, Dave, I'm quite interested in how you then become solo after this. I mean, we've been slowly creeping up towards it now.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything. When you talk about Aboriginal land rights in a major theater during a showcase. So that's what happened. I built the show. It cost me like $100,000 I produced $100,000 in federal, state, city money. I had sponsors. People were behind this idea. But as the artistic director, I'm the mouthpiece. And, I'm the guy who approves a script kind of thing. And I go, well, that was written, and that's what we're going to say, because that's what everybody's saying, that if we don't address the Aboriginal issues, the elephant in the room, which is the Aboriginal issues upon which this country was founded.
It's kind of a cop-out.
Yeah, we've got to talk about it. It's got to be talked about. And it made me persona non grata, that I did this. I came off the stage. The audience was kind of stunned when this happened. We got polite applause, but not much. And I came off stage, and I remember there was a clown named Conrad Flaps who was going to do the next piece. And I looked at him and I went, well, we did that. And he looked at me and he went, you certainly did.
Oh.
And you just sort of, your heart kind of goes, oh, did I do something wrong? And it was like, you just did, you just do the work, you just do the work. You don't, at that point in my life, I didn't give any thought to that I would be personally attacked for this position, a position which is as relevant today as it was then. But I was kind of like on the vanguard of it, that we were talking about it, but nothing was ever happening. And so as a young man who had been in a lot of difficult situations as a younger person, I really wanted to see everybody get along. I just wanted to help spread the love. How do you do that? Well, let's talk about the things that are hurting us, and our shows should in some way, shape or form be uplifting and entertaining, of course, but in the end, they should give us a greater wisdom of the world we're living in. The pursuit of the positive human condition has been at the center of everything that I do. That I came from such a tumultuous background. All I wanted to be was a good guy, which was probably too much for some people, because you sit there and you go, well, Dave, you got to have some flaws. And I go, no, I don't want to have any flaws, but you have flaws just by saying that. So, and
yeah, we're all human. We might have perfect intentions, but they're going to be carried out by a flawed mechanism in the end,
Yeah.
So you've had all these feelings now. You've gone through this moment. You've become persona non grata. You're now walking down a lonely street with no umbrella and it's raining, and you're thinking about your life, I assume.
Yeah, I remember when I left the theater, I had a backpack on, the truck and everything, and all the stuff was out. And I remember standing in the theater looking at what was kind of left of it, and knowing that I was going to leave the doors unlocked so that whatever was left in there would just get pilfered. It was a building in a vacant lot, sort of in the Skid Row neighborhood of Edmonton. We called it the Nebulous Rebels Multipurpose Rumpus Room. And it was the home of the Nebulous Rebels, and Interlude Mime Theater operated there. So I used my commercial operation to finance my experimental work, used my solo money to funnel into both, because in my world, I needed to balance things out. I needed to be commercially successful, but I didn't want to give up invention. And I learned a very valuable lesson at that when I created a show called Sequence 13. The effects of mediafied violence on the passerby. I was 19. It was a 16 millimeter film performance interaction that I did. And I made the mistake of presenting it as the Interlude Mime Theater, which had a kids audience. And I put it on at the 10 Foot Henry's Club. And sure enough, some moms with kids came and left pretty much immediately. And I realized, oh no, right, I've got to do this kind of work, with an entirely different name. So to keep my balance, that was when, the Nebulous Rebels, I became part of the Nebulous Rebels, was to put my experimental work under a different banner entirely. It was a big lesson. Yeah. I did.
And so how do you find yourself then? Because you moved to Australia at some point. You leave Canada. You stop working theatre, if I'm correct, and you go on a journey on the street. But how do we get there?
Oh, well, by going to Toronto, one of the good things that came out of the showcase in Edmonton with Sybil the Civil Dragon, where I was persona non grata, is the show was seen by a producer, Roy Higgins. And Roy Higgins saw some potential in the show, and he says, I'm going to tour you through Ontario. And I was like, yeah? He goes, yeah, there's a lot of trouble up in the Indigenous communities up by the Lakehead in Thunder Bay. We're going to get money from Northern Mines and Resources to take this show and tour it through the Indigenous communities of Northern Ontario. And I was just like, really? And it was like, yeah. So I got a full budget to hire the crew of 8 that was needed for the show. It was a van and truck tour. And the show went, and he booked the whole thing. And I didn't actually have to go on the road, which was an interesting part. I'd go and visit from time to time, but the show went off and did its thing with stage manager, and it was all union actors. And while that was happening, I was doing comedy clubs around town. I had an acting agent. I was getting auditions for TV roles and not getting anything, of course. But I became a real fixture at Harbourfront as a street performer, and was one of the first ones there. I was playing at Harbourfront the same year that the Flying Dutchman did their first show together on that pitch. And it was like the same day. I went down there, and did my thing, and then they showed up and they did their thing, and we were like, oh, you you know, and that's when I got to know Jean-Michel Paré and Michael Sling.
And were you doing your mime at this point still? Were you doing the stuff you did before, or it's changed now?
No, it's changed. The arrival in Toronto revealed a whole new developmental segment of my life, and I started working on a thing called Hotch's 3D TV. That the battle we were having as performers, I believe that we needed to accelerate what we were delivering on the streets because attention spans were being shortened by film and video. And so when they came to the streets, what if they were to see something that, you know, was cutting and switching and flipping dramatically from one extreme to the other? And so I came up with this whole series of routines that involved some magic tricks and some choreography and some juggling, but mostly it became about interacting with the public. And so I really honed my skills. The show, one of the first shows that I did at Harborfront, I was so nervous that I had this set of things that I was going to do. And I was really nervous. I didn't know how to start. The big cul-de-sac right by the water. It's like the Queens Quay Terminal. It's beautiful space. You know, it's like huge turnaround for trucks. And you get that filled up with like 1,000 people. You're killing it. And so I remember I started the show by just going up and sort of saying in the middle of the circle, I'm going, hi, my name's David Cassel, and I'm going to do a show, but I'm really nervous. And what I really need is just really serious. I just need someone to hug me. And I was serious, right? I was like, I just need someone to come up and hug me. And sure enough, this lady came up. She goes, oh, there you go. And I'm like, oh, and a couple of people stopped. And then I kind of twigged to what had just happened, that people were interested to see this woman hugging me. So I immediately just went right to it again. And I went, thanks. Thank you very much. And then I was like, I wait until she sort of got out of the way, but a couple of people had slowed down. And I kind of looked again. And I went, I'm really nervous. And I think if I get a few more hugs, I might be able to get this started. And the crowd started to build as I started getting hugs from people. I'd hug them. I'd put my head on their shoulder and I'd like, thank you. Thank you so much. And so, like, I don't know, about 10, 15 minutes passes. The crowd is built to this. Like, it's huge now. And all I've been doing is just hugging people. And at one minute, it comes to this point, I'm going, oh, I'm really nervous, you know, and I can't start the show until I have, could you hug me? You know, and it was just like this brazen kind of, and that became the beginning of the show every time that I just started hugging people. And I'd do like 15, 20 minutes like that.
Cool. And why did you do streets at all? I mean, assumably you have money in the bank. You're not desperate and poor at this time. Why walk out on the street after you have a touring theatre production that's paid for at this time?
Oh, because I was broke. You know,
okay.
You know, the show goes out in tours, but it's still in the educational realm. I get paid my producer's fee, my writer's fee, you know, but that's a percentage of a greater number. I'm not walking away with any more money than anybody else on this thing. I might have been the creator of it, and if I could have sold the television rights or something, but I was never about that. I was about trying to do this thing, and it got done, and it got picked up, and I was happy to see it do its work that it was supposed to do. But I had to move on and get with the times. It was the late 80s, the 90s, and gentrification of our waterfront had occurred. And I started working the streets. You know, the thing was that I did apply for theater jobs, but I was the artistic director of my own theater company, and I didn't have any degrees. Like, I didn't graduate from any of these universities that I taught at, you know. And so in the industry, you know, union actors, BFA graduates, they all get the primary consideration for the roles. I got a few roles. I played in one show by the Actors Equity Showcase, and that I did okay for that. I got an actor's fee, you know. But you know, one of the cool, I became a fixture at Harborfront. They would sometimes have festivals, and I get paid a fee by them, you know. So,
was there a point where you thought, right, well, street performing is what I'm going to focus on?
Yeah, there was. Pretty much that first weekend that I went to Harborfront, same kind of feeling that I had from the airport and the same kind of feeling I had in Calgary hit me again. I was like, oh, this is great, but it's better because the audiences are way more sophisticated. There's a lot more people. My equation of 52 people a minute. I used to say to the performers, I'm going to stand here and I'm just going to see if 52 people pass here in 1 minute. Why 52, Dave? Well, you know, do the math. If 50 people pass in 10 minutes, how many people have I? You know, if 50 people pass every minute for 10 minutes, how many people have passed? If I can pull 10% of those people and turn a crowd. So I'll say 52 people a minute because it sounds great. And I would sit there and I would tick over the number. And if 50 people walked into my realm during the course of that minute, then I'd start the show. If it was 38 or 42, I wouldn't do it, man. I'd wait. But that was a luxury you had back then too. The pitches weren't full of performers. I could show up at Harborfront and stand there for like an hour nervous going, doesn't feel right. There's no flow. This isn't happening. And then you'd see a flow and you'd start when you saw a flow, you know? And so I really enjoyed that. And then it was the summer of 91 that I fell down a flight of stairs and broke my ankle. And I broke it in like May. And I ended up in a cast. Doctor said, you're out for the season. And I was like, no. I make all my money for the winter in the summertime. And he was like, well, not this year. And so I was like, no. So I was going to be in a cast for 12 weeks, 3 weeks having the cast on. I couldn't stand it. I started going out and doing shows with a cast on my leg. Okay. Oh my.
And how did you find the work developing as you're doing more and more street shows now, and you're, I assume, honing your experience to work doing this set piece show in this Harborfront?
Well, you know, those are the days when I used to finish the show by standing on two guys juggling fire torches because I had no better finale. I did all these sort of precursors to the Space Commander show, but Hotch's 3D TV ended with a juggling fire routine on shoulders. You want to come over here for a second? Sorry, I've got a little child with me tonight, and she seems to be upset. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm live right now, baby. These are the challenges we have, you know. So, I'm sorry.
Well, Dave, we can. It's fine. We can, if at any point you feel like you need to, we can put this down tonight and pick it up another night. So you don't have to finish everything in one night. Just so you know.
Do you want me to stop today, Gracie? No. Is there something you need, baby? You want a hug? Can I come and give a hug? Come here. There we go. I'm just gonna give a little bit of love here. There we go. Right. Am I getting too loud for you? It was all good? All right. Probably the story earlier on of my youth, but anyway. Yeah, ask the question again. We'll keep going as long as we can.
So yeah. I mean, maybe what we can do tonight, it seems like quite a logical thing to do, is let's lead you up to going to Australia, because you go to Australia, you spend a long portion of your life, and then we can pick up the next time we talk on your life in Australia. And it seems like quite a logical bit. So let's get up to there.
All right.
So you're at the Harborfront, you're developing the work.
Yeah. And then I fell down a flight of stairs, and I have a cast on, but I go out that summer anyway, and I do shows with this cast on. I'd met Rex Boyd by this stage, and we were touring places like Halifax and stuff, you know, with our Fritz and Otto show, and we were hoping to become a big comedy duo. Fritz and Otto Get Funkified, where we did this show about two German scientists who shake things up to make them better, you know. So when I broke my ankle, I did the summer and I passed my hat, but what happened was I figured, I'm going to have to go and do the winter in Australia. So that was I went down to the Australian consulate. I asked for a visa, and they handed me a permanent residency visa. I said, I just want a tourist visa. I said, well, fill this one out anyway. And I was like, all right. So I filled it out, and I got the points I needed. My father happened to be Australian, which went a long way, which helps. And I was able to get the rest of the points up through things like what I'd done in my job and stuff like that. And so they granted me a permanent residency visa from the get-go. I'd never been to the country. And so I contacted Steve Scott at the Coffs Harbour Buskers Festival. I said, hey, I'm coming down. Have you got any spots in your event? And he goes, yeah, I'd love to have you. Come on down. So I went to Coffs Harbour, and I arrived in Sydney first and saw a little bit of the Sydney scene, and then went to Coffs Harbour. I think it was October, where I appeared in my first Australian festival, and I won the City Council Award for Best Act. So that was the best act by the Chamber of Commerce.
Wow!
And it included.
Wow, so, well, let's do this, Dave. Right? I've got a Thursday later on this month free. Would you like to come back on later on this month on a Thursday?
Yeah, we just have to check and see if my daughter's with me that night, because I should probably.
Yeah, we can sort that after.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we'll do that again. I'd just like to say how fascinating it's been. Really has. Absolute pleasure listening to you talk about this stuff. Really.
Thanks. I think I'd probably have a little bit less stress if things weren't happening.
You did perfectly fine. I think you've been very professional, and you've been professional as in two guys talking on the internet about their lives. It's been an absolute pleasure. For now, I'll let you go and sort of stuff you got out. We will see each other later on. Everyone who's watching, you will be able to catch Dave and hear the story of him creating a show, which, when I learned, was a mythical show used as an example to describe how street performers don't need to do tricks. And it's something which I've held for many, many years of my life, as I've been trying to get rid of all the tricks out of my show. Still one fucker left most of the time, but most of them are gone. So, Dave, thank you. I look forward to hearing this story later on in the month. For everyone else who's watching, thank you for watching. Dave, would you like to say anything else before we go?
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's been a real joy, and I look forward to talking to you again, Matt. Thanks.
Cool, nice one. Okay, goodbye, everyone. Goodbye. I'm pressing stop, and